My name is Alan Kelly, and I'm going to talk about goals over backlogs, why you want to work with goals, not backlogs. This is part of an idea I call objective-driven Agile. This talk is in two parts. This is part one, why use goals. Part two is going to talk about how you set good goals. It seems to me, when I look at the state of Agile, the world around us, when I look at what is being written about Agile, when I look at what's being presented in conferences, that the Agile world, as we know it, really splits into two parts. Half the people in the Agile world are talking about people, and they're talking about the importance of people and how we get the most from our people and how we respect our people and why we should embrace diversity and why we should have psychological safety and all that other good stuff, which I cannot argue with. They are all absolutely right. We should be getting the most from our people. We should be helping our people do their best. We should be providing with psychological safety. The other half of the Agile world is talking about processes. And when I say processes, I mean this in the broadest sense. So I'm going to include tooling, and I'm going to include processes like continuous delivery in here, as well as the older test first development. Now, the people on the people side of this equation have righteousness on their side because they're in the Agile manifesto. It says people over processes and tools. So the people on the people side are right. The people on the process side are on a sticky wicket, as we say. Now, I have to confess here, I'm on the process side. I am very concerned about the processes and the tools we use in our Agile efforts. Now, I'm going to defend myself here. I'm going to stick up for myself and say, I'm really concerned with the processes for the people. To paraphrase Karl Marx, the workers control the means of production. For me, we can only really respect the people if we have them work in processes that respect the people. If we can only respect the people if we don't continually overwork them, if we don't continually expect them to have 20 items of work in progress, if we don't put them into processes which means they can't actually do their best, that they are not able to speak to the people they need to speak to, if people are divided up into silos with barriers and walls that stop them from speaking to the people and working with the people they need to do a good job. So yes, I'm very concerned about process, and I'm going to defend process because I think process is important for getting the most from our people. A few years ago, back in 2015, I published a book, Xanpan. The secret of Xanpan is it contains XP, by the way. Xanpan was an idea I've been kicking around for a few years. Xanpan is my hybrid method combining iteration-based software development approaches like extreme programming and Scrum with more flow-based Agile development processes like Kanban and Lean. Now, the secret of Xanpan was that Xanpan tells you to create your own methodology. The story of Xanpan is told by telling the story of some teams, 3 teams and their boards in particular. And what I advocate in Xanpan is every team needs to find its own way of working. And once they've found what works best for them, then they can work backwards to uncover their inner process. And if they uncover their inner process and their values and their principles, then they can share it with other people. They can share it with new team members, and they can think about how it could be better. Something I've taken to saying since I wrote Xanpan, and something that is implied in Xanpan if you read it carefully, is the only thing you can do wrong in Agile is doing things the same as you did 3 months ago. You should always be seeking out ways to improve. That's what we call continuous improvement. If you're not seeking out ways to work better, then are you really practicing continuous improvement? Some of those things you find you may try doing, and you may find you're not actually better, and you may need to backtrack, but at least you're trying. Now, you can argue whether 3 months is the right time frame, whether it should be 1 month or 6 months. I think 3 months is about the right time. You make up your own mind. But what I want you to do is continually be changing, continually be evolving, because Agile is about change and movement. The opposite of Agile is static. And static means you're not changing. Static means you're not trying to improve. Hence, the only thing you can do wrong in Agile is to do things the same as you did 3 months ago. Always be trying to do better. This comes from my deep belief that the thing we call Agile is learning, and it is acting on that learning. And that learning, when we act on it, creates more learning. Think, for example, take a regular bus journey you make, and you discover there's another bus that runs a similar route, goes from a different bus stop in the opposite direction. And you go and you take that bus, and you find that this bus is better and it gets you where you're going faster. So you start taking that bus. You've learned something, you've acted on it. Now you're taking the new bus. You learn new things. You learn about that route. You learn maybe that you could leave the house later to get where you're going. Because learning creates action, and action creates learning, and learning, it's circular, it keeps going round if you're doing it right. So Agile is learning. Now, since Agile is learning and acting, there's always things you could do better, which means whenever you walk into an Agile initiative, it looks like there's things which are flawed. There are problems, right? I've been involved in so many Agile initiatives over the years. The only ones that don't look flawed to me are the ones that I initiated, and I'm biased. To somebody else, they will look flawed. But those flaws are where we can improve. All those things that are not correct, are not right, that could be better in the beginning, are opportunities for improvement. Agile is not a point you reach. Agile is the process by which we improve. So all Agile initiatives are flawed. And it is by working Agile that we improve Agile, that we improve the way we're working, that we are getting better. So I know when I go into an Agile initiative that somebody else has initiated, it can be very draining, even depressing, because you think that's not right. The only thing that's really wrong is if people aren't improving, if people aren't learning and trying to do things better. Now, the reason I say this is because it prompts a question. And it's a question you should have been asking already. What would I change in Xanpan? If Xanpan was written 8 years ago, and it predates writing it, I had experience, I had the stories to tell. We are now 10 years further on. What would I change in Xanpan? And actually, there's quite an easy answer to this, because there's one problem I see in team after team after team, whether they're doing Xanpan or Scrum or XP or any other method you care to mention. It's this. It is the bottomless pit that seems to exist in every initiative, every project, every work effort. And that pit, that bottomless pit, is the place where stories go to die. And we call that bottomless pit the backlog. When you say to somebody, that's a good idea, let me put it on a card and put it in the backlog, what you're saying is, no one's ever going to hear this story again. Once upon a time, we thought backlogs would burn down, but experience shows backlogs grow. It doesn't seem to matter how fast we run, the backlog seems to grow. So how are we going to solve this problem? Because just throwing more people at it doesn't seem to solve the problem. My answer, quite simply, is throw it away. Nuke your backlog. You have nothing to lose but your burn down charts. We need to find a better way of working. Backlogs worked once upon a time, but now they've become these bottomless pits with burn down charts that just run away to the horizon. So I suggest, going back to the title of this presentation, that we replace the backlog with goals. We think about what we're trying to achieve, how we want to make the world a better place. So simply, stop using backlogs, start using goals. When you work with goals, goals become your story generators. Every time you want to know what should we do next, power up the story generator, you turn the handle and it spits out some stories. So we need a framework for setting our goals. And fortunately, there is one that already exists. It predates Agile. Many Agile teams are adding it to their Agile. It's one I would go as far as to say, if it didn't exist already, we'd probably have had to invent it. And I'll explain why I say that in a minute. It is the OKR framework, objectives and key results. So we start by setting an objective, an outcome that we wish to bring about. And then we set some key results. The key results are actually our acceptance criteria about the outcome. The outcome is a big description, an inspiring description of the world as we want it to be. The key results describe that world in quantitative, numerical terms. They are our acceptance criteria, our success criteria, sometimes our bounding criteria. So think about that for a moment. Does that sound familiar to anybody out there? Because actually what we're looking at here, although we call it OKRs, is an old Agile idea. It's an idea that dates back to extreme programming even. It's essentially the same as test-driven development or acceptance test-driven development, which became behavior-driven development. The idea is the same in each case. We say, what do we want to bring about? What is it we want to create? How are we going to measure that thing? How are we going to know we are done? We do it at the unit test level, we do it at the acceptance test level, and now we can do it at the management level. So I've taken to think about OKRs as test first management. Decide what outcome we're going to bring about, decide how we're going to measure it, decide how we're going to measure how close we get to it, and then we set off and deliver it. Now, some people consider the OKR framework as a reintroduction of command and control by the back door. And certainly, if everything you read about OKRs stems from the 1970s and 1980s, I can see why you'd say that. But the fact is, we're not in the 1980s anymore. We're in the 21st century. We're a good way into it, in fact. And the OKR framework can be used in an Agile sympathetic fashion. And instead of it being command and control, it's more about the teams feeding up. In fact, I go as far as to think that OKRs allow teams to create an API for themselves. The team looks at the company goals, the company purpose, the company missions. They look at the company strategy. They listen to what their customers are telling them. They listen to what their stakeholders around them are telling them. They listen to what their peer teams would like them to do. And they combine all this information and they boil it down to a few priorities, perhaps just one, certainly no more than 3 or 4. And these are their objectives. And these are the things the team set out to deliver by the end of the quarter. And so the team is saying to the stakeholders and leaders and peers and everyone else around them, this is what you can expect from us. And they document that, they capture that using the OKR framework, using the idea of an outcome and some success criteria for that outcome. OKRs are as much of a bottom-up process as they are a top-down process. So stepping back a moment to Xanpan. Back in 2021, I was asked to do a Xanpan presentation. And back then, which is a couple of years ago now, I updated it. And the main change I made was to say I would have more goals and I would have less backlog. Which might lead you to the question, was the backlog a mistake? Did I with Xanpan and Jess Sutherland with Scrum and Kent Beck with XP and everyone else, did we make a mistake with the backlog? Was the backlog something we should never have done? Let me introduce Baby Otter. Some of the parents out there might recognize Baby Otter. Some of the parents out there may not recognize Baby Otter himself, but they might recognize Baby Otter for what he stands for. Baby Otter was my son's cuddly toy. And many children out there, as parents know, choose a cuddly toy or even a comfort blanket. And this cuddly toy becomes the child's safety. As children grow and they have to do things outside the home, away from their parents, they go into a very nervous situation. Children are looking for comfort, and so they choose a comfort object, be it a cuddly toy or a blanket or something else. That comfort item, what psychologists call a transient object, gives them some comfort while they have new experiences, while they try doing something new. But over time, as the children become more confident, the children don't need the comfort object. The children outgrow the comfort object, the transient object, and the children can leave it at home. I would like to suggest that backlogs were our comfort object as an industry. 20 years ago, we only left home if we had a 300-page requirements document, signed in blood, signed in triplicate, queried, sent back, queried again, sent in again. And with Agile, we started to accept changes. We started to work a different way. But we kept our backlog as a comfort object to move us away from requirements documents. I would like to suggest that backlogs have outlived their usefulness. We can do this now. In the next part of this presentation, separate video, I'm going to talk about setting good goals.